So what this is real world practical end user computing, and what that means is we're going to go over a little. Let me just get some information from you guys. How many of you have touched Vue before? Okay, and how many of you have it in production? Oh, wow, great. So there'll be a lot of more information. Some of this might you might have already encountered. Are any of you already on Vue 5 or 5.1? Great, super. And is anybody, I should have done this in a different order, who hasn't touched Vue but has touched other virtual desktop products? Okay, good. So that's good. And then who hasn't touched any of it at all? Excellent, we've got a good cross-section. So the progression of this is we're going to be talking a little bit how to deploy what we can give you now, which is Vue, and a little bit of a horizon. But we're also going to talk about where we're going. There's going to be some tasty information presented. This is Jerry Cook. He's a senior architect. I know he's a senior. He does so many things that are not in the architect umbrella that it's hard for me to remember. So we're going to get started. If you have, I want to keep this. The word is interactive is what I'm looking for. So please feel free. If you have any questions, let me know. I've done this presentation in parts a couple times. I've never done it in this aggregate, but I can let you know whether it's going to be later. There are going to be some actual troubleshooting tips that I do have to gloss over, but there's some resources later if you want to do deep dives on either storage or PC over IP or even anything else. So the big question that you need to ask yourself is you've got users and they need to get access to a virtual desktop, we'll say, or a virtual instance. But what do they really need? Do they need an OS? And right now the answer is pretty much yes. And that's because everything at this point is, in many organizations, is bound to Microsoft. The little flagging Windows flag. And so that's what you have to offer now. Plus, it's not always easy to jump directly from a physical desktop infrastructure to something that's a little more distributed and a little more anytime, anywhere. On the other hand, you might already be expanding that. You might already be doing a BYOD. You might already have the basis of what you need to run. So do you just need to give them a couple of apps? To the first part of it, no one ever comes into the office and says, I think I will start up Windows XP and start working. No, they go, first off, they never expect it to just start working if it's Windows XP, but they go in and they say, I need to write an email. I need to use Microsoft Office in many cases, or I need to use Zinpro, or I need to use Gmail, or and on and on and on for the application. And there are many ways of doing that. I mean, you can see here we've got the Windows apps, you've got the SaaS apps, you've even got mobile apps. And so that's the first question that you need to ask yourself. We will get into the bottom one a little bit later of how to do apps. Right now, let's start talking about desktops. So once you've made that decision. So first off, what Vue is doing for you is allowing you to give you desktops as a service. Right now in the physical environment, and I'm sure those of you who have done at least a partial migration to virtual, you realize that desktops is, let's see, DAAPITA is what physical desktops are. And what we'd like to be able to allow you to do is deliver desktops as a service. Something that you don't have to think about, something that's almost as easy as when a new user comes on board, it's as easy as giving them a new Exchange mailbox. Rather than having to sit there and watch a progress bar from Ghost, and then reconfigure and then add the custom apps that they need. So, coupled with ThinApp, we allow you to connect and use Vue as the connector to deliver that desktop to most devices. So we can do iPad, we can do Android devices, tablet and phone. We can do Mac, Windows, and Linux at this point. And it doesn't matter, it keeps it all fully isolated. And so the basic architecture is, you start with, and this is where Vue came from, you start with the vSphere infrastructure. And honestly, What View is, it's a highly well-managed virtualization of desktops rather than servers. That's where it came out of. We had a lot of customers 4 or 5 years ago now that had lots of extra licenses, God bless them. But they decided, hey, let's just throw XP on there. And then they would start giving out IP addresses to their users on a Post-it note. And after about 20 users, that spreadsheet became untenable. People would start losing Post-it notes. So we needed a centralized management. So that's where this comes in. It's generically called a connection broker, although in View it does a whole lot more. That is the single host name that any of these endpoints, that any of these users need to go to. So view.yourcompany.com is now all that user needs to remember. And then in here, does all of the work, whether it's at the vSphere side or the authentication side, or anything in between. On that, we've got View Composer, which now, we'll get into this, but now can actually be a separate instance, but works directly with vCenter and allows you to help manage your images. And then we've got ThinApp to help manage your applications. And I'll get into all of that a little bit later, but that's the general basic architecture. This is obviously, for any of you who have ever deployed View, this is a very simple engagement because we have the ability to go horizontal, which means you can do replica servers to load balance, and then we can also go out into your DMZ without exposing anything in your Active Directory. So basically everything is centrally managed. Now this is a good image to remember because that's where we want to go with managing your end users. We want to go to a user-centric type of computing. So keep that in mind as I start talking about View, which is right now just for desktops. So first off, we are using vSphere as the basis. With the license, with the bundle licenses, you actually get the enterprise level of vSphere. So you can, and I've dealt with a lot of customers, they're actually giving a better SLA for their desktops than they are for their servers because they can't afford to buy Enterprise Plus for their servers, but it comes with View. So they're using distributed virtual switch, they're using storage vMotion, they're doing fault tolerance, and so they're actually able to give that. But the basics are, if you're already a vSphere admin, you have the core foundation of being able to build a highly performant virtual infrastructure to support your desktops. I'll get into some of the subtleties a little bit later about what's different about doing it for desktops than it is for servers. But a lot of the core understanding and the hurdles that I've had to get over when explaining this to guys like you and gals, I was using guys in the gender neutral, and it's not gender neutral, so everybody, people like you. And it is sometimes just having to explain what vSphere is and does is the biggest part of it. Being able to deliver a remote desktop to an endpoint is a lot easier to understand and comprehend and figure out. And of course, pools are pretty easy. So what's new in View 5.1 is something called Storage Accelerator, and that is basically host caching. What it does is it takes all of the commonly accessed disk activity for desktops, and there's a lot of commonly accessed disk activity. And it uses the host's memory, some of the host memory, not all of the host memory. Very minimal amount per host to help cache that in memory rather than on disk. Now that's a great, actually, you can see the IOPS savings that you can get from that. It's a significant IOPS saving of both peak and average IOPS, and those are important for planning. Yes?
So some people in the past have talked about using SSDs in a local drive, a local storage. Does this kind of make that not necessary anymore?
In this instance, it kind of does unless you're storing your replicas on there, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend. SSD has a big play in part of your View design. I'll get a little bit into that a little later. But yeah, you're right. For this specific instance, yes. But there's still some, there actually is still some
in high
post-paging.
Yeah, in high density memory commitment states, having an SSD there can accelerate performance.
Right, in over-commitment, right.
Yeah, but only if you're running at very, very high memory consumption level.
So what this is for, what this was designed for, is to get around the issue that a lot of our customers have. Everybody comes in at 8 o'clock or maybe 10:30 if you're dealing with engineers, and they log into Exchange all at the same time. Or they start up their computers all at the same time. So that's what's called a boot storm. And when you're booting up, it's all the same, basically the same version of XP or the same version of Windows. It's all loading the same thing. That's specifically why you're seeing such a dramatic reduction. It's also useful for things like virus scans, although we still recommend staggering that. And virus updates, if you're still using end client updates, we have an endpoint solution for that. So it's useful in many very common instances that would bring down your storage infrastructure. Not bring down, but cripple you. Is that the same thing? Yeah, bring down or cripple. We'll have a breakout session on the differences if you want. So first off, Vue is that one server that I was telling you. All of this is accessible by a single web interface. We've dramatically improved the speed. Well, we've improved the speed. I don't have any numbers behind how dramatic it is, but it's noticeable. We've improved the speed from 5.0 to 5.1. And it's all about, this is what enables you to entitle and watch pools and see who is entitled to what, whether that's a desktop or whether that's an application. And so you can see exactly how your desktop infrastructure is running. To take a step back, you're still creating these virtual machines in vCenter. You're still doing it like you would with a server as well. You're still customizing it. But once you finish customizing it, you've applied the zero-day exploit. You go in here, you click a couple of buttons, a couple of right clicks, and you have now deployed a newly secure desktop protecting yourself against that zero-day exploit if they've released a hotfix. And how do we do that? First off, the Vue Manager talks directly with the vCenter server and does all of these API. Remember I said that all Vue is highly managed virtualization of desktops. These are the basics of a connection broker. It talks with vCenter, it deploys behind the scenes. You tell it very easily, hey, I want a maximum of 50 users, but I always want 10 in the bullpen in waiting. And so it will deploy those as people log in. It'll say, okay, I'm down to 9. Let me go deploy a new one in the background. And so it'll do that all appearing magically with the fade in. It actually takes a little bit longer than that, but in some cases not much longer because we're using a system called, a feature called Composer, which does linked clones. And so rather than having, say, 10 50 gig virtual machines on your storage, so it's 500 gigs, what you would do is you would have one 50 gig base image, and then you would have a little differencing disk off of each one. And as far as the user is concerned, they will see a full environment. This is a lot like snapshots. It's just snapshots are very linear. One is based on 2, is based on 3, or actually vice versa. This actually allows you to branch out into a tree, all using that same base image. So you get tremendous storage savings, but if you think about it, it also helps you with security and with updates, because instead of having to run Microsoft Update on all 10 of those machines, if there's a breakout, what you do is you update the one template, you push out that template, users are logged out, logged back in, and within minutes you can get them a a more secure desktop. I have to be very careful about saying unbreakable, but a highly secure desktop rather than having to wait for all of that. So you've got the time savings, but going back to storage considerations, you also save on the I/O too, because as you know, desktop updates or installing anything can be a high I/O task. So ThinApp is another way that we manage this. ThinApp, has anybody here worked with ThinApp specifically? Great, good. Now what's great about it is it can work independent. It can be used on virtual or physical. It allows you to actually take an application and virtualize it and abstract it from the operating system. So we've got a little VOS as part of the runtime. VOS is virtual operating system. And we've got the application, and that application is not just what you find in program files. It's the things that are thrown into the System32. It's the registry settings. It's everything that application needs to run. It can effectively be stored inside a single executable that has everything in there. The sandbox is there for customization, so a user, as he has a ThinApp application, can have his own set of bookmarks or his own set of settings. And still, when you push out an update to this application, they'll still keep those bookmarks. It's not technically encapsulated in there as part of the file system. You do not have to install a single thing on your operating system, whether it's a physical or virtual operating system, to get Firefox, to get Acrobat. You can just literally drag it and drop it from machine to machine. You don't even have to drag it and drop it. You can run it off of a file share. That's called, we call it streaming. I know that there's probably going to be confusion in the application people that saying it's this kind of streaming. That's what we call it. It's just running it off of a file share. What's great about running it off of a file share is if you're running something like Office, you're not loading the whole Office suite when you double click on the Office icon. You are only loading what it needs to run at that moment. So you'll see little bursts. One of the things, to give you an idea, let's take a look at the Creative Suite from Adobe. One of the things that we do to help alleviate the size and the load time of that is we remove all of those custom fonts, because if any of you have ever watched a load screen on Adobe Creative Suite, you watch it loading, optimizing, and loading fonts. So there's that. It would load those up, but you can take those out. They're not needed. For Excel, it'll only load what it needs when it needs it, so it's very well optimized. What that allows you to do from a view standpoint is it allows you to effectively have one template. You know what everybody needs. It's XP or Windows 7 and maybe Office. Maybe not Office. Maybe not everybody wants to be licensed for that if you've got a lot of web work. And so what you can do is, whether it's an accounting user or a marketing user or a desktop support user or a customer service user, they can all be using the same base image, and then you can entitle each group, because that's how View works. It works with Active Directory users and groups. You can entitle each group to different sets of applications that are pushed through ThinApp. So think of the support reduction on your team from not only having to test what applications run on what builds. I don't know if you've ever had to do that. Does it run the same on a desktop as it does on a laptop because of this weird driver here? But also, you only have to manage one image. That's what our end goal is. Not everybody gets that on the first try because there are some subtleties about what can and can't be ThinApp. That's part of where our partners and our professional services come in. Additionally, for security, you can have your external users still access the same View Manager server just by posting a security server which tunnels the PC over IP protocol, and RDP if you want it, over HTTPS. And that way they don't even need to have a VPN on here. You can send a user at a home, a thin client, with the View server programmed into it, and they can get a full desktop at their home. You can give them the link to the download of the Windows FAT client. They can use it on their home machine that, if they have kids, is probably infected with a lot of malware. Not that I know that from personal experience. But it will be fully independent. There will be no crossover. It is just as isolated as if you were running a workstation, an isolated workstation VM on that.
Question?
Yeah.
Does it support two-factor as well?
Yes, it does support two-factor. Is that not? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
And that's how we use it at VMware. I log in, I go to view.vmware.com. I have to put in my RSA token information. And then I have to put in my Active Directory information. And all of that is then passed into the VM, and I get whatever I'm entitled to.
Is it any two-factor, or is it just RSA? Or is it
right now it's RSA on the outside. We have other, on the inside or on the LAN level, we've got some CAC cards and proximity cards that we are also compatible with, but that's more of a hardware thing.
Be configured to only require the two-factor through the security server?
Yes. Actually, so it's, I didn't call it out, but people on the inside can go directly to the View server. People on the outside can go through the security server, and so only the people on the outside would be getting that two-factor. You can still program that in on the View Manager server. What the security server really is, it's a stripped-down version of the View Manager, because this talks directly to AD using Atom, and you don't even want Atom, the extra schema editions of Atom, you don't even want that in your DMZ. So we just pass through authentication here to make it as secure as you possibly can, while not requiring VPN, which can dramatically affect your PC over IP performance on the outside. This is new in 5.0. A couple of improvements in 5.1, persona management. So let's take these let's take that composer that we're talking about, we got that pool of 10. You can do what's called a floating pool, which means that me, the user, doesn't have to go on the same machine every time. But I'm a regular office worker. I have my Word documents, my Excel documents, my picture of the dog on my desktop. That's all saved somewhere. We used to do something, well, we still do something called persistent disks, which are basically a separate VMDK that's mapped. But the problem, it worked great until you needed to go outside of a pool. If I'm allocated to 2 pools, I would have 2 persistent disks, one for the power user pool, one for the IT user pool, one for the regular user pool, whatever I'm entitled to. But what this does is this uses a Windows share, basically, and it stores your profile. Now, I hate to use this word, and I'm probably going to hear a couple of groans. It is similar to roaming profiles. But,
It works.
yes, it works. What it does, so one of the main things it doesn't do, which is a big differentiation, is it does not load everything at load time. It only caches what you need to run at that moment. And then as you work, it'll start loading things. It is very fast. I can attest to this. We use it once again, at VMware. I've got a lot of stuff stored in my Documents folder and in my Settings folders. And it is very, very fast. Part of that is, well, most of that is because of the persona management. So there's an animation here. See, this is what I hate mentioning, but the problem is that some people don't get the idea of what it is. It is only similar in that it is a Windows share. But the advantage to that Windows share is that for you, if you're doing any backup administration, when a user runs up to you and says, I just deleted this Excel spreadsheet, you can just go back to that Windows server that has the share, that's got their username mapped into it. You go, you find it, you say, there's your Excel spreadsheet. So it works both on an adaptability, where you can go from computer to computer, so I don't have to be on the same computer at the same time. And so what that means for you is you can actually do, there's another feature in View that allows you to, when you log out, it'll reset it back to that base template that we were talking about. So if a user accidentally installs an IM client, a Twitter client, a BitTorrent client, it'll be reset the second they log out. And everybody who logs in will get a fresh machine. With persona management, they will get a fresh machine with their personal info on it. So I really killed the room, man. I will never mention that again. So remember I was talking to you about virus updates. Ultimately, what you don't want to have to do is you don't want to have to install an agent, just like with our old VCB technology, which is now VADP, for backup purposes. You don't want to necessarily have to have an agent on each of your virtual machines. That introduces a load. When you run a virus signature update, you have to update each one of those virtual machines. What if we could leverage the power of the VM kernel and the visibility of the VM kernel and look into what's going on disk, on network, on processor, on RAM, and be able to see what's going on and work below the operating system layer. And that's what Endpoint is. It's an appliance that allows all of your common antivirus vendors to have an antivirus appliance in there that will not require an agent install and will allow you to see what's going on. You only need to run an antivirus update in one location. That's that antivirus appliance. And when I say appliance, I mean virtual appliance. I don't mean a physical drop-in to you thing. And it allows you to push out updates very easily and see what's going on. Because remember, one of the things that the malware does, some malware, at least the malware that's really effective in some cases, is it looks for antivirus to disable. In this case, it's not even there. It's happening below. It's watching what's happening on disk. It's watching what's happening on the network and going, I recognize that activity. Additionally, you get the I/O and the performance and the resource savings by only having to really have it in one place. So that's the basics of the infrastructure that you're working with View. Then we want to enable the users to have a desktop-like experience, a local desktop-like experience. And that's where PC over IP comes in. But what it is it's also very, very adaptable. It allows you, it will constantly monitor and it will figure out how much it needs to do. It does what's called a progressive build. So it was a little subtle. Let's see if I can get it to do it again. it doesn't really show up here, but it'll start out with the text, very important for most purposes, and then it will start on the static images, gradually make those better, and then it will work on the video. Now, in many cases, this is perceptually, it's invisible to the user. It's not perceptible to the user. So, depending on your environment. So if you're working on a LAN, it'll go up. This is very important for a tuning perspective of what you want to give to your user, because you're probably thinking, but that probably takes up a lot of bandwidth. And yes, it does, if you're delivering YouTube, if you're delivering training videos all the time. So the next section, after we just go over, so these are all of the new features. I did breeze over a couple because I want to be able to get to Jared's, the Horizon information and some of what we're going to be doing with applications. So if you want to, please reach out. You might, in fact, reach me. One of the things that I do is I am the Northeast Inside Systems Engineer. So I may have already talked to some of you. I've been doing this for 5 years. I've been supporting the Northeast exclusively all 5 years. And so if you have any questions, if you want a fuller presentation of just the view features for perhaps your CIO, someone who doesn't necessarily need to see NextCap, then I will be happy to do that. So if you want to get an eval, a proof of concept, or even get your pilot started off right, there are a couple of things that I'll give you a warning. This is what Chris wanted me to get to you. First off, follow the install and eval guide. Those are very important. The order of install is very important. On the server side, if you don't install Composer before you install Vue, you have to do a lot of tap dancing to get it back. It's not too bad. On the desktop side, if you install the agent and then you install the tools, you'll get things like sluggish performance, because sometimes the tools, the VM tools and the Vue agent have different video drivers. So then you have to, once again, you have to go back, you have to troubleshoot, you have to install the right driver. So this will save yourself a lot of heartache. Just make sure, basically for the desktop, it's tools, everything else, agent. And that's, any more specific, and we have to have a longer discussion. Also, opening up firewall ports, that seems pretty obvious, but we're talking about a completely new firewall port with PC over IP, and so you want to make sure that that's open. Sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes you will open up, you'll be able to authenticate to a Vue server and you'll get a black screen. That is usually because the firewall port is not open, usually. So in 5.1, there's a new wonderful little thing that we have to do, which is we don't include a VMware signed certificate, self-signed certificate, so you can get authentication issues. You can integrate it with Active Directory using that knowledge base article. 2020913 is to help you use certificates within an Active Directory environment. To be clear, there is no problem if you're using a certificate authority signed certificate. It's only if you're doing self-signed stuff. So now let's talk about some of the other things that'll trip up their storage. Now this is part of a much longer, an hour-long presentation that we have for a series that I will tell you about a little bit later. So if you want more in-depth, please refer to that. This particular one was just launched yesterday. So let's talk about the challenges. So first off, sometimes just because of the name, you think of storage in terms of capacity, but with virtual infrastructure, virtual desktop infrastructure, you want to think of performance. Just because you have a terabyte LUN that will support 200, 300, 400 virtual desktops, I want you to imagine all of the IOPS that are going on there. So you want to make sure that you have your number of LUNs, you want to make sure that you have the right disk. There was a picture that I wanted to show you just to laugh at. Apparently in one of our desktop diagrams, the architecture that's recommended is SSD everywhere. So, and I can tell you that EMC or NetApp or all of our storage partners had nothing to do with that. I think we were just trying to make it easy without realizing that you have to pay for that SSD, don't you? So, RAID group is just as important. And so that's what you need to balance. So when you're thinking about it, think about performance. Size doesn't matter. Well, it does, but it doesn't. When you're talking about designing it. This is a key one because the term that I talk about when I'm talking with people who are starting a pilot and are going to be moving to a much larger deployment is sometimes that 201st desktop user can be your most expensive user because you didn't plan for capacity, or capacity meaning number of VMs, number of data stores, so you have to buy more storage. So keep that in mind as you are planning of what you're starting with, what you're going to grow to. There are going to be jumps as you need to buy more trays or in some cases more storage. Because we want the users to have a good experience. We have some back of the napkin calculations later on. Some general average use, and this is average of all of you. I'm sure most of you are going to think in your head, no, my users use more. Our high-end average user, what we found out, is 10 IOPS. That's what we use as part of our general back of the napkin calculations. So this goes down to 2 or maybe 3 for our average users, our medium users rather, for average medium, extra medium. Good size. Yeah. Our extra medium users and our low end users can be 1 or 2 IOPS. So that's something that you can very easily do. We've got in the longer presentation, we've got all sorts of charts about what you can expect performance-wise from a SSD array versus a SAS versus a SATA. So keep those in mind as you're doing this. But you also want to be able to deal with the peaks. A lot of the general planning is the average IOP usage, but you want to be able to deal with the peaks. So implement the View Storage Accelerator for the boot storms. That'll definitely help you out. Implement View Storage Accelerator for antivirus, but also do vShield Endpoint. Full scans, you want to stagger. You still want to stagger. You can't stop scans from, granted, once again, View Storage Accelerator will help with that. Login using virtual profiles will take the IOPS off of the system disks and onto that that Windows share. And also you have the option of leaving users logged in. If you want to optimize your image, there are lots of options available, both official and unofficial. And then you want to take advantage of the linked clones and do RRR, which is recompose, refresh, and reset. That's it? Rebalance. That's right. I always get those mixed up. So recompose is what you do when you push out a new base image. Reset is that fallback that I was telling you about. When a user logs out, completely resets that linked clone and brings it back to base image. And rebalance will take, because you can very easily add multiple data stores, it will figure out if you've got 2 data stores and a lot of users are logging off of this, you maybe have 10 on here and only 2 on here, you can hit rebalance and it'll actually redistribute. You want to do that to help balance your IOPS because then you've got a full LUN here and you've got these users complaining and you've got barely partially full LUN over here. Rebalance will help balance that over. You want that to be part of your desktop administration and you want to probably try and do it at off hours if you're not running a 24/7 operation.
Is the rebalance just about the LUNs, not about the ESX servers you're running on?
That's right, because the ESX servers, that's usually handled by DRS. There's really no problem with that. Storage DRS is a whole other story when you're talking about linked clones. But DRS, that's unless you have it turned off, that's always going, and you do not have to worry about that. So these are some links. You can notice they're all from the same site. These will help you figure out some storage considerations. Things like that CBRC, that storage accelerator, does add some extra storage space requirements because it has a little cache file that tries to basically, for each VM, that helps it figure out what's common among all of the VMs. So that's should be part of your storage considerations from a size perspective, as well as the new vSwap. And then the back of the napkin, all of this is by one of our own guys, Andre Levici. This is his personal site, so this isn't officially sanctioned by VMware, but it's definitely absolutely worth it for anybody trying to plan, especially on their own. Now, with that said, I can say, engage one of our partners. Our storage partners will be have done these before. They will help you with things like this, the SAN versus NAS discussion They will help you with how their, the RAID level and the disk level, how those perform. It'll be very helpful with this. You can see I'm kind of breathing through. I'm doing on time. Am I good? All right, I will be soon. Oh, sorry. So that's what the back of the napkin thing looks like. So let's do PC over IP. There are three things that you can, improvements that we've done in 5.1. Text codec, we've enabled, this is my favorite part about it. There's a feature called disable build to lossless. It's off. We've disabled build to lossless by default. So you need to enable disable build to lossless. That's actually our first recommendation. It's almost zero impact unless you've got people doing medical information, then they will notice. But what disable build to lossless does is it makes it do perceptually lossless, which is in fact for 95% of the users is in fact perceptually lossless. It will do that compression, and you can see there you can get 10 to 15% bandwidth savings. Client-side caching, introduced in 5.0, improved in 5.1. These are things that you can use. All of these features, depending on the type of end client that you want to do, you can see the soft client has all of these features available, and down to the Terra 2 client, which are forthcoming. If you have any questions about the Terra 2 client, there is a Teradici representative here. He's at the Dell booth, but he works for Teradici. You can ask him about what's going on with the Terra 2 clients. He mentioned, I spoke to him just before, he said, please send them down. And then you can see in between what are, for instance, our soft clients, our other soft clients allow you to do. So this is part of your planning. The other thing to keep in mind when to tune, the first thing you should look at is your network. Make sure your network is good. And make sure you're not blocking the ports. Make sure you're not introducing packet inspection. That might slow things down. Make sure you don't have too many hops in between all of the components. That will affect it just as much as doing some of the PC over IP tuning that you're going to see. PC over IP adapts, not dramatically, automatically, and all the time, and I'm blanking on the word. Dynamically. Thank you. It adapts dynamically, so if for some reason everybody starts downloading FTP at the same time, it will actually automatically reduce for you. Now you can tweak that so that it never takes up some more, and I'll show you why later. But keep in mind, as you do that, you will start getting a reduction, and this is actually not going to show you. I can show you this later if you want to. This shows you out-of-the-box settings. You can't even see it's a starry night. I should have reduced some of the lights, but here are the types of bandwidth savings you can get. So I'm going to talk about all of these down here. Out of the box, you've got something like that. This is one example. This is your mileage may vary, offer not valid in Vermont and Wisconsin. So this is what you get when you turn off build to lossless. When you start restricting it to 12 frames per second, about 15 frames per second is where people really start noticing the difference. So you can even start there, and users probably won't even notice a difference. Down to 8 frames a second, you can restrict the maximum image quality, kind of like what you would do when you're saving a JPEG. So 80%, 70%. You can restrict the audio. So unless you're doing dictation stuff like a law firm, you can very easily restrict the audio. As you go down from 250K to 70K, and then this is the general bandwidth cap. So you can put a cap down there all the way down to 1500K. Well, I mean, you can do it lower, but this example shows the type of bandwidth savings that you can get just by tuning it. Obvious recommendation is to do it one at a time so that you know what is affecting quality, because that's the one thing that you're going to be watching for your users, or your users will be watching if they're doing the testing for you. Here are some resources. You notice a lot of them are VMware resources. I highly recommend a lot of the guides that we have, our Zero Client and our PC over IP optimization guides. We worked on those with Teradici. But then there's also, here's Andres, and there's our Windows 7 optimization guide. I'll show you where to get them later. But then we've also got another VMware employee who's been doing a little fling. Are you guys familiar with VMware Flings? VMware Flings are kind of our betas, our tests, our labs that developers often will design and throw out there to help solve a particular problem. Another fling that was just released this week was a controlled recompose that will figure out inactive virtual machines and recompose those. rather than having to do a full recompose. Once again, it's a fling, so that means it's not supported, but in the case of like the front-end block parser, you're not going to necessarily get yourself into trouble with a bad log parsing. So it's something that I trust a little bit more than, say, controlled recompose, which is actually pretty cool, by the way, but no support. So we've got a front-end log parser and a log viewer app. This is by Chuck, and he's going to maybe be moving it to Mindflux Inc. I don't know if that's changed since he created that. So these are the manuals to read. We've got, just go to the view page and go to the technical resources tab. We've got a whole design section. And then we've got a deploy section. And the deploy is where we've got things like how to optimize your Windows 7 and your XP clients.
Is this going to be available?
I can make this available, yeah. At worst, I can make all of the links available. But I don't think we have any proprietary non-distributable. So the last thing is, we just rolled this out this week, is the Mobile Secure Desktop Bootcamp. It is, the whole series is designed for, say, our federal, mostly for our federal customers. So if you're a federal customer, please look at all of the videos. But specifically, we've got a much longer presentation on storage considerations. We've got a much longer presentation on PC over IP. And then there are a couple of other things for things like Big IP. There are a couple of partners that have done some great work. And then we've got the overview. I think the overview is what has the do SSD for everything. So let's bring on Jared. Thanks, everybody. I'll still be here, but let's bring on Jared. He'll talk to you about apps at this point. Cool.
I'm going to do this in 12 minutes. Usually I do this in 4 hours. So here we go. Hold on. So one of the things that I want to get out of you as we start talking about this is I'm going to give you some information in the next 12 minutes that's not going to be released, and it hasn't been released to the public yet. And we're actually going to be doing announce at VMworld. So I'd actually like to get your feedback as you hear some of this information, because I mentioned we're doing keynote day 2, and you might want to reform that depending on your opinion. So we just talked about this, right? View. And I think you're familiar, and you seem to be familiar with the idea or concept of the broker sitting in the middle and distributing out to endpoints from a back end. But what we're going to talk about now, and who's heard of Horizon from a VMware perspective? Not the thing in the distance. All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about Horizon and what we're doing there. Horizon for us, if we look at it, we start to take the broker in the middle of View, which you're familiar with, right? And Horizon starts to become the middle center point of a universal broker of services. Today we think of it, and it is a GA product that's available today, we think of it in terms of delivering applications out to end users, not devices, but to users. They could be on any variety of devices. And we think of that as a service. We think of giving those applications as a service. Today, those applications encompass things like FinApp and SaaS applications. And really, when we started down this journey about 2.5 years ago of building Horizon, we purchased a company that's at the core, which is a little company called TriCipher, that you may know. But they were really wrapped around identity and managing identity of users to get those services out. So if we keep it in the middle, of everything as we get those services, the intent is to start extending this. So when we think of View today and what you're doing with View, there's no reason that we don't necessarily want to deliver View to users as well, right? Very few times, and if we go back to the beginning statement here, very few times are you actually trying to deliver an OS to somebody. Most of the time you're trying to get them to be able to do their work, and that's inside of an application that may need to reside on an OS, depending on what device they're on. So when we talk about Horizon, we really think of it in terms of device agnostic and service agnostic. So it's a true universal broker of services in the center. When we started doing this, we really thought about SaaS first. And the solving the SaaS problem is actually the hardest of the problems to solve. SaaS, software as a service, that exists in the outside world, such as Google Apps and Workday and all of those types of applications, represent infrastructures. And from an IT control point, you lose control of all of them, right? You have nothing. You're blind at the firewall. You have no ability to do any of the things that are X'd out here, which is your contract management, your risk assessment, none of it. So solving that problem was really about bringing it back in. So giving you a choke point that you could actually provision users to those SaaS applications and gain back all of the security controls that you would need as an IT organization around that. This is really talking about the emergence of that rogue IT, which is the whole idea behind SaaS, which is that instead of actually having to be a barrier, IT could be a barrier to infrastructure adoption. It's really hard to go install your own document management system as an end user. You really can't do it, right? It's millions of dollars, it's a lot of people setting up servers. It's really easy to do with Google Apps. It's $50 and I'm done, and I get a credit card, and it might be a corporate card, and now all your data lives in their cloud. And when they leave, you've also lost it, right? Because they take it with them. So we solved that problem inside of Horizon, and that's where we started with Horizon about 2 years ago as a hosted service to be able to control this in the environment. Today, it's a general, we released it last month as a generally available platform for on-premises to do thin app and SaaS management, as I mentioned. So if you were trying to solve this problem before on your own, which we had some customers doing, we had service providers doing, we had some of our larger customers doing, they were trying to build this stack, which is discrete APIs to those SaaS applications. And really what you're doing is you're creating a connector or bridge to those applications. Again, really hard, really time intensive, and this is what it started looking like. So if you imagine the little organizations, if I developed discrete APIs, it's, again, terrible. To solve this, again, Horizon's sitting in the center. What we do is we actually create those connectors for you, and we actually make those bridges happen and put them in a catalog where you can choose them, and you can click on them, and then you can enable Google Apps, for instance, to your organization, but not lose the control, and also provision users from Active Directory out to Google Apps. Okay? So for people, when I give this talk, and I give this talk to CIOs all around the world, they always tell me, oh, we don't have any SaaS applications in our organizations, so this doesn't really matter to me. And I say, oh, you don't use Dropbox, nobody uses Boxnet, nobody has a Gmail account, nobody does this. Well, yeah, we use Dropbox. Well, you use SaaS applications. You have a problem and you don't even know about it. So that's one of the things. The next piece into this that came was as we're solving the SaaS problem, you also realize that people are using SaaS because they have multiple devices in their organization, right? They want to be able to use their iPads to get that application access. They want to be able to use Android and whatever Amazon's developing next to come out with, and Facebook when they come out with their phone. Whoever does what next, it's your next problem coming in the door. How do you deliver things to those devices? So this was another piece to the Horizon puzzle. This is a similar mesh-looking thing for delivering these types of services to these types of devices. What you get is you get a ton of overlap. That's the only point that we're trying to make here. And this is, again, terrible. So Horizon sitting in the center is that choke point. What Horizon does from a policy perspective today is we really do things around all of these, right? So we talked about a little bit about federation, and federation is just simply pulling those directories together and managing them from one simple place. So when we think about anywhere a user account lives as a directory, we have our Active Directory internal, and we may have user accounts into other internal applications, which we also support with Horizon, or those SaaS applications. And this is all just to give you kind of a premise of what Horizon is in the middle. Horizon is actually two components that sit together. They're two virtual appliances making up a connector and a service. The service is essentially where the user would go to be able to see this workspace where these services live, like those application types, etc. As well as the connector, which sits in the back end, providing access to any local resources. Architecturally, this makes it available to have these resources shared. So as we think about things like the security server and view, allowing for access back in, Horizon also allows for this access to come back in for all these app types today. One of the things that it provides for in the center of this, and one of the things that we think about is we think about context aware. So as you start to solve the problem for multi-devices and then multi-locations, when you talk about getting into things from the outside world, and you're serving up file and access types, one of the things that you want to consider is you want to consider that as a context that you're in. So if I want end users to be able to come and use information or services that are inside of my company, I may want to control what they see when they're in a different location. So to really pan this out, or to paint the picture here, you think of it in terms of, I have a SaaS application that has financial data behind it. I have the ability to save files from that application. One thing that I may want to make sure is that as the person signs in on the public internet, that they don't have access to that unless they've come through two-factor, or they're on an OS that I trust, etc. So I do the interrogation in real time, and I may not present them with that application in that workspace, given those pieces being made up.
Is the end data still being stored on whatever that services cloud is? So in the case of Google Documents, is it still ending up in Google's files?
It does, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we don't remove that. We just control the point to get there.
Yeah, who has authentication rights to that in what location?
Yeah, so we switch it out on them. What we do is we replace the auth-n, or the authentication,
Sure.
and go to auth-z. So we do an assertion or authorization. So we replace that login and that login ability. So say you have users that want to go to Google Apps.
Yeah.
As you put Horizon in the center, what you do is you're essentially federating with Google Apps through the use of SAML, which is Security Assertion Markup Language, so that you're using token-based authentication to Google Apps. So when that user goes there, they're always redirected through Horizon to log in, because that's the only piece that has the actual token. So I'm storing and I'm interacting with Google, but as an end user, say I get fired, right? You disable my authentication rights from Active Directory. You've then cut me off from Horizon, and I never was able to log into Google Apps on my own because I don't have the token. So I just brought my data back.
Yeah.
So context is a huge thing. This we described as far as the architecture. There's two pieces, the connector and the service, and the workspace. And this is where it all goes, right? So as we think through those pieces, and what I want to get your feedback on is kind of this point, is that we're not stopping there as VMware. We're not stopping with FinApp and SaaS. We're moving this out. We're moving this out to encompass all of our end user compute products, to be able to serve them through this frame, or through this workspace. We're moving out to all these things on the right-hand side of your screen here. Think about data services and the ability to frame out data in that workspace, regardless of location or regardless of device type. So really what we're getting at here is really getting towards what the post-PC era is about. The ability to work on any of these pieces. So the mantra basically in our group is any application, any device, any time. And as you start to look at the permutations of what that is, it starts to get mind-boggling, but that's what we actually mean, and that's what we're developing for. As well as all of these other pieces, the ability to do data. So some of you may have heard, and I'll touch on these two bottom ones, some of you may have heard announced last year, Project Octopus at VMworld, and some of you may be in the beta, and that's really our Dropbox for the enterprise, bringing that information back in. Well, Octopus doesn't exist anymore. Octopus will be called Horizon Data, and will be snapped into the Horizon work frame. So essentially, when you go in, you'll have the ability to see your files, your services, your applications, and we treat it all as a service on the back end. So context starts to become more important, as we mentioned in the last frame, or the last slide. Another piece that we think of here is we think about app publishing, and we think of that as Project App Blast, if you heard about that from last year at VMworld, which is really our ability to do HTML5 remoting from a desktop out to the web. So this really means that it's an agentless solution to be able to get an application onto a desktop without having to have anything there. This will be controlled through Horizon in the future. So say I'm on an iPad and I want to use a Windows app, and I want the Windows native experience of that application. Because I have a browser that supports HTML5 on that iPad, I would have the ability to remote that directly to that iPad. So the user would be able to use those Windows apps without having to have anything resonant there from an agent perspective. Is that interesting?
Yes.
Woo! All right, so what does it start looking like? When we think about it, this is the idea, right? We have a phone, we have a tablet, we have a desktop. If you look, and that's right in here, so it's hard to see, the whole point here is that the center of the screen is the workspace, and that workspace is web delivered. So all I need is the ability to sign into the web, and I get my workspace of Horizon. And it looks the same for me essentially on each of those devices. I'm going to obviously remove services that can't be launched there. So in the case of an iPad, the user's not going to get a bunch of thin apps in the frame because they can't run them, right? But they may be presented with App Blast apps. They may be presented with View client, View desktops. If I blow this up a little bigger, this is the whole idea. I do say this is subject to change. This is older version screenshot, so it doesn't necessarily look like this right now. But it still maintains the same idea. The idea of bringing in data to the side, bringing in desktops in there into your view, and giving somebody the access to basically get to all of their resources regardless of device and regardless of where you're at. You guys are the first to see it, by the way. Unless you signed an NDA with me, or we're a gigantic company. So this is something that we're going to be talking about day 2, VMworld. And this will be in the labs that we do there. This will be the keynote for day 2. This is where we're going and bringing it back into. Some of the things that I would also stress here, if we go backwards, and I started this talk, is just remember that from a Windows application standpoint, I said this is going to be more than just what we produce as a company. You can let your minds wander with that, but that's what I mean. So you can start to visualize other people who build application types out there that may end up in our frame. And I think we're 2 minutes over, and that was extremely fast. I'm going to be around the rest of the day. If there's questions, pull me aside, etc.
So I'm probably going to be